20th. I am afraid. Someone is coming. That is, I think someone is coming, though I am not sure, and I pray that I am wrong. I went into the church and prayed all this morning. I sprinkled water in front of the altar and put some flowers in it, violets and dogwood. But there is smoke. For 3 days there has been smoke. Not like the time before. That time, last year, it rose in a great cloud a long way away and stayed in the sky for 2 weeks. A forest fire in the deadwoods. And then it rained and the smoke stopped. But this time it is a thin column, like a pole, not very high. And the column has come 3 times, each time in the late afternoon. At night I cannot see it, and in the morning it is gone, but each afternoon it comes again, and it is nearer. At first it was behind Claypole Ridge, and I could see only the top of it, the smallest smudge. I thought it was a cloud, except that it was too gray, the wrong color, and then I thought, there are no clouds anywhere else. I got the binoculars and saw that it was narrow and straight. It was smoke from a small fire. When we used to go in the truck, Claypole Ridge was 15 miles, though it looked closer, and the smoke was coming from behind that. Beyond Claypole Ridge there is Ogden Town, about 10 miles farther, but there is no one left alive in Ogden Town. So begins Robert C. O'Brien's Z for Zachariah from 1975. I think I first read this book when I was 10 or 11, 4th or 5th grade. There was an old paperback copy of it in my school library in upstate New York. And I just wanted to take a minute to talk about it because it's kind of a beloved book that I've always had in my collection. Its story always speaks to me, its narrative always tears at my heart. Z for Zachariah is the story of a teenage girl surviving in a rural American town after a nuclear war has occurred. And she believes she's the only person left alive. It's a wrenching narrative about hope and despair. And the author, Robert C. O'Brien, who also wrote Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim, died before he was able to write the final chapters of the book. His wife and daughter finished the book. And you will not find in the post-apocalyptic genre a more shattering and sad and yet ultimately uplifting ending as Robert C. O'Brien's wife and daughter came up with to end his story. And this leads into the title of the video and why I wish film studios would quit adapting this book. And the reason is, if you are not going to embrace the brilliance of the end of this book, of its last chapter, if you're not going to go there with the audience, you're really doing a disservice to the story and the author. The last time they remade this film was in 2015, and I was very excited when I saw the early rushes because it starred Chiwetel Ejiofor, who is one of my favorite actors. It's an inspired bit of casting to put him as Mr. Loomis in the story. It's a perfect fit for him. He can do a smoldering, edgy quality, which fits the character perfectly. But the woman they cast in the lead for Anne Burden was a woman in her early 20s. And then they decided to make it a love triangle with Chris Pine. Okay, none of that has anything to do with Z for Zachariah. That is actually remaking another film called The World, the Flesh, and the Devil, which I believe came out in 1956 or 7, starring Harry Belafonte, which was about a love triangle between a black man, a white woman, and another white man. Violence ensues, and ultimately at the end of the movie, the woman says, "Hey, let's all be friends," and they all walk off together, hand in hand. It was a weird, kind of stupid ending for a 1950s film. It didn't really address anything in the story. It presents the female character in a very strange light. Anyway, that's The World, the Flesh, and the Devil. That's a very interesting 1950s post-nuclear war film with a bad final act, right? Z for Zachariah is not a love story. There is no other man. There is just Anne Burden, who lives alone in the valley by herself after a nuclear war, until Mr. Loomis arrives. Mr. Loomis is apparently a scientist from a government research facility. He has a radiation suit and a cart of supplies he's been dragging with him through the wasteland. And at first Anne is very suspicious and terrified. She doesn't know what this man wants. She doesn't know what he's about. Maybe he's going to try to rape her or kill her. She doesn't know. So in the story, she watches him for several days, and he ends up drinking from an irradiated stream that he doesn't check properly. He gets terribly ill, and Anne finally breaks down and goes to help him because he gets terribly sick. As the story progresses, and Mr. Loomis gets more well, he becomes more deranged and more paranoid, to the point where he finally tries to restrain and possibly kill Anne. And then it comes to the point of a life and death struggle for survival for her. It's not a love story. It is, though, a story about a very strong female character who has more hope than anything else. And all I want to say is, because I do not want to spoil this book, if you've never read it, the final chapter will blow you away. You will not expect it. It speaks to a kind of feminine strength that filmmakers seem to be afraid of, and it's a solid thriller. And I just don't know how anyone would not think that the ending was completely brilliant and not want to adapt it exactly as it was. You know, the only reason to put a romance in there is if you think the source material is too depressing, and I mean, if that's how you feel, don't make the movie. Or make your own movie and give it a different title about a love triangle after a nuclear war. But don't call it Z for Zachariah. And this book is like ripe for an honest indie adaptation. You know, you could do a very good version of this story for probably less than $500,000. It's not effect intensive. It's all performance and location. You know, there's plenty of places in the southern U.S. that would be perfect. You know, in some ways, it reminds me of film adaptations of I Am Legend in that way, in that screenwriters who adapt that story never really seem to want to take on the real ending of that story, which is extremely ironic and meant to shock you, meant to be stunning. You know, the Will Smith I Am Legend came close in the alternate cut. That was a much better ending for that story than the suicide grenade ending they did, and making the character out like he was Jesus, which never had anything to do with the story of I Am Legend. Despite all the references, Jesus references, people feel the need to stick into that story. There's nothing Christ-like about the character Neville in I Am Legend. Absolutely nothing. Yep, just chalk it up to a general complaint to Hollywood. You know, if you're going to adapt something, rewrite the middle all you want, but don't fuck with the ending. Well, I think that sums up my feelings on that subject. Next week I'm also going to talk about some books, but this time I'm going to talk about books where my question is, why haven't they been made into movies already? Alright guys, see you next Tuesday. Thanks for watching.